Hey folks, my name is Pip Gordon. I'm here today to read to you for just a little bit from my recently published book, Gay Faulkner, Uncovering a Homosexual Presence in YOKNAPATAWPHA and Beyond, which was published at the very tail end of 2019 by the University Press of Mississippi, and is, by the way, currently available from that press in both paperback and hardcover. Um, I apologize. I'm broadcasting from my house in rural southwest Wisconsin, and my video quality on my home computer is a little bit grainy, and the light in here is not the best. I'm doing the best I can, I swear. Um, but I wanted to take 5 to 6 minutes or so and read to you from my book a specific incident that helps to highlight some of the ways in which Joseph Blottner's archival notes on William Faulkner have some elisions and omissions in them that are fascinating and help us, when we look at them, to understand the degree to which Faulkner was, in fact, aware of gay identity and gay communities and gay people as real people, and sometimes even appropriated their stories to tell his own tales. The story I'm going to tell involves William Spradlin and William Faulkner. It also involves Ben Wasson, one of Faulkner's friends from Oxford, Mississippi, and the incident that occurred when Spradlin and Faulkner arrived in Europe in 1925 to begin a European tour that would last through the end of that year. So Faulkner did eventually make his trip to Europe. He and William Spradlin traveled together after Faulkner had submitted his manuscript to Soldier's Pay for Boney and Liveright, which accepted it for publication. The two Williams arrived in Genoa on Sunday, the 2nd of August, 1925, and immediately got themselves into trouble. According to William Spradlin's memoirs, sometime after midnight, Spradlin, admitting that he had reached that stage where everything seemed irresistibly amusing, approached a woman and a man, whom he describes in his memoir as her business manager, and proceeded to toss coins on the floor while dancing on a table. In his drunken state, he had convinced himself that he had found a pimp and a prostitute, and was delighted that they both scrambled after the coins. The fun lasted until he was arrested for stomping on the coins, and therefore defacing the image of the king on them. He spent a night in jail. In his memoirs, Spradlin describes very little about his prison experience, except to say that he spoke to other prisoners, including a young kid, and an Italian war hero who had escaped the French Foreign Legion in Africa. Spradlin does report that, in the morning when Faulkner came to retrieve him, Faulkner was distant and gloomy, and seemed mad at Spradlin. When Spradlin pressed him about seeming a little sore, Faulkner rebutted, why shouldn't he be sore, having missed such an experience himself? Joseph Blottner, in his original biography from 1974, remained faithful to Spradlin's account when he recounted it there, and he puts it in its proper chronological place. Blottner then included with that story that Faulkner shared this incident with Ben Wasson, a friend of Faulkner's in Oxford, in a letter in which he, quote, made himself the protagonist, end quote. Whether or not Blottner ever saw this letter is unclear. This letter has not survived in the archive, but Wasson reported in his interview with Joseph Blottner that Faulkner had written him, quote, from Europe, saying he had been jailed in Italy. Obviously and characteristically, he had appropriated William Spradlin's story, end quote. In his interview notes, immediately following this sentence, Blottner added, quote, Ben says Bill Spradlin introduced the Riviera to America, whatever that means, end quote. But for reasons also unclear, Blottner crossed this sentence out. Such simple facts belie an important detail in the story, which does appear in the revised 1984 edition of Blottner's biography, but nowhere in the first two-volume edition, nor, for that matter, in either of Spradlin's published accounts, nor in either the handwritten nor the later typed versions of Blottner's interview notes with Spradlin when he interviewed him in January of 1965, though Joseph Blottner would cite that specific interview in his one-volume revision in 1984 as the source for a profound piece of information about Spradlin and also about Faulkner's appropriation of his night in jail. According to Blotter, during his interview, Spradlin admitted that, quote, there in the dark cell, another prisoner had begged for his sexual favors, and Spradlin had brusquely granted them, end quote. When Blotter added this detail to the 1984 revised biography, he quite pointedly did not include it in its proper chronological place with his recounting of the general material, which appears in Chapter 18 there. Rather, he added it later, in Chapter 20, with a general overview of some of Faulkner's fictional output from his European trip, and thus far removed from the reference to the identity switch that Faulkner made in his original letter to Ben Wasson. Joel Williamson, also one of Faulkner's biographers who wrote William Faulkner and Southern History, followed Joseph Blotner's lead and his notes and his sources, and included that Faulkner related the incident to Wasson, and in fact changed the incident to say, quote, that it was he, not Spradlin, who got into difficulty and was thrown in jail, end quote. Williamson also placed the incident from the jail immediately in context with Faulkner's appropriation of the story. He explains, quote, apparently Spradlin told Faulkner that while he was in jail, he participated in a homosexual act, end quote. Though Williamson also adds, quote, presumably, however, Bill did not tell Ben about a sexual encounter, end quote, only that he, not Spradlin, had spent a night in jail. Williamson declined to include any interpretation of this strange identity switch beyond the adverbs apparently and presumably, both of which likely stem from the fact that he was following Blotner's published comments in the revised biography, but could not confirm those comments in the archived interview notes, where no record of this homosexual encounter appears. We must assume that Blotter would not have included this information had Spradlin not told it to him, but he did not write it down in his notes. Though perhaps something of this story explains Wasson's reference to the Riviera that prompted Blotter to write whatever that means. That Faulkner took a story about a sexual encounter from his gay friend in Europe and told it to his gay friend Ben Wasson in America creates a chain of gay erotics between these men and implicates Faulkner's sense of continuity in his relationships with them. It is tempting to read Wasson's ambiguous statement about Spradlin bringing the Riviera to America as some kind of coded reference to his knowledge of Spradlin's gay exploits in Europe and his return to America afterward. But, alas, the dearth of detail in the interview makes such a reading difficult to support. As a matter of apocrypha, the incident and its suggestive implications seem so nearly to be the smoking gun that does not smoke. But obviously it would be intriguing to find a handwritten letter by William Faulkner in which he told Ben Wasson that he himself had a homosexual encounter in an Italian jail, even if Faulkner was just faking it. Despite the items missing from the proverbial evidence room of archived materials on Faulkner's life, however, Williamson does draw attention to the curiosity of the incident and Faulkner's interest in and appropriation of it. It is not a stretch to wonder aloud if the fun that Faulkner regrets missing was Spradlin's homosexual encounter in a foreign jail, but solid proof eludes us. Scholars are left only with the inference and deduction, those old ellipses familiar to all biographers of LGBTQ lives. Thank you very much.